I never expected to hear my own family planning how to rewrite my place in our shared history. It happened on a quiet Friday afternoon, the day before Labor Day, while I sat in my car on the side of a county road just outside Sullivan, Missouri. My name is Sophia Harlan. I am 31 years old and I work as a rural property consultant, helping families sort through land records, tax questions, and practical decisions about acreage that has been in their names for generations. I had driven down from St. Louis because the family property still required decisions that no one else seemed willing to handle alone. I told myself I was going for practical reasons. The recording changed what I was willing to tolerate. I had pulled over at a wide spot on the county road just before the turn that led to the gravel drive. I needed to send a quick voice memo to a client about fence line questions on another parcel. I pressed record, then took the call that came in from my older sister. We spoke for perhaps 4 minutes about arrival times and who was bringing what. I said goodbye, ended the call, and set the phone on the passenger seat. I did not notice that the voice memo app was still running. When I stopped again a few miles later to check the route, the screen showed a recording that had continued for nearly 20 minutes after the call should have ended. I almost deleted it without listening. Instead, I pressed play. My older sister's voice came through, first speaking to my mother as though I had already hung up. The line had stayed open on my end, and the app had captured everything that followed. We will tell everyone the fencing was a family project, so Sophia does not make herself central again, my older sister said. My mother answered without hesitation. She always frames it that way. If anyone asks, we say the family took care of it together. She was occupied with her own work and wasn't really available for the day-to-day decisions. They continued for several more minutes discussing how to describe the barn repairs I had arranged 2 summers earlier, and how to present pending decisions about the back pasture as something the family would settle together. I listened to the recording twice more, sitting with the engine off. The words were not new in substance. What was new was hearing them spoken so openly between the 2 people who had raised me. They believed I was already off the line. I saved the file and put the phone away. Then I started the car and drove the remaining distance to the property. Turning around would have been simpler. I chose to keep going because I wanted to see whether they would repeat the same framing to my face. The gravel drive was longer than I remembered. My cousin's truck was already parked near the barn, and my aunt's sedan sat beside it. I pulled in next to them and carried my bag toward the house. My mother stepped onto the porch as I approached. You made it, my mother said. The smile she gave me was the same measured one she had used for years. Your sister and I were just going over the photo arrangements for tomorrow. We thought the barn would make the best backdrop for the Legacy album. My older sister appeared in the doorway behind her. We can go through the order after you put your things away. It will be easier if we decide the groupings tonight so no one feels left out. I set the bag down on the step. I already heard some of the plan. My older sister's expression did not change, but the pause before she answered was just long enough to register. Oh, well, we can adjust anything you'd like. We want everyone comfortable. I picked up the bag and walked past them into the house without replying. The back room that had been mine since childhood still held the same narrow bed. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the mattress, and opened my email. A new message from my mother and had arrived 20 minutes earlier. The subject line was empty. I opened it and saw at once that it had not been intended for me. She had replied to a thread between herself and my older sister and had included my address by mistake. The text was brief. Remember to bring the old photo album from the attic. We should go through it tonight and decide which pictures belong in the legacy book. Sophia tends to linger on the ones where she believes she contributed more. It will be simpler if we select the images first and present them as the family record from the beginning. I read the message once, then saved it with the recording. Outside the window, I could hear my cousin talking with my aunt near the barn. My father's voice joined theirs a moment later. They sounded at ease, unaware that anything had shifted. I closed the email and remained seated. 2 separate mistakes had already been made. The recording that should never have existed, and now the email that should never have reached me. They still expected silence. The following morning, the light was clear and the air was still. They had set up the old tripod in the yard near the barn. My aunt had brought a folding table and spread out the boxes of photographs and papers she had carried down from the attic. My cousin was helping my father move an old bench into the frame. My older sister stood near the camera, directing where each person should stand. Sophia, you can stand on the end, my older sister said when I came out, next to my aunt. That way the height works for the picture. I took the place she indicated. While the others adjusted, she continued speaking to the group. Yeah, we're putting together a legacy album for the property. Something that shows the full history without any one person claiming more than their share. It's important that the story stays balanced. My aunt nodded. That sounds wise. Families can get tangled up in who did what. My older sister smiled at her. Exactly. Some people tend to keep score. We're making sure the album reflects what actually happened, not one person's version of it. I stood still while the camera clicked. When the shots were finished, my older sister lowered the camera and turned to the table of old photographs. We should go through these now while everyone is here, she said. Decide which ones belong in the album and which ones we can leave in the box. Sophia, you might want to help sort the newer ones. You're good with details. I stepped to the table. My mother began lifting images one by one. My older sister leaned over her shoulder. That one with the new fence section, my older sister said. We can use it. It shows the family working together after the storm. My mother held the photograph up. Yes, everyone pitched in that summer. I reached across and turned the photograph slightly so the date stamp in the corner was visible. That section was replaced 2 summers ago. I paid for the posts and wire and hired the crew when the storm damage was worse than the insurance covered. My older sister's hand rested lightly on the edge of the table. You were here for part of it, of course, but my father and I handled most of the coordination that week. You had work in the city and couldn't stay for the full repair. I looked at her. I stayed for the full repair. I slept in the barn the night the crew finished because the rain was coming back in. The others had gone quiet. My aunt was studying a different photograph. My cousin had stepped back from the table. My father cleared his throat but did not speak. My older sister picked up another image. We can discuss the details later. For now, let's keep the focus on the pictures that show the property as it is now. That's what the legacy album needs. She set the photograph down without looking at me. The conversation resumed as though the exchange had been ordinary. I remained where I was sorting the stack in front of me without comment. When the others moved inside, I stayed at the table for a moment longer. One of the older envelopes had come open at the corner. A folded piece of paper slipped part way out. I pulled it free without drawing attention. The paper was thin, the handwriting faded, but still legible. It was dated from the summer the fence had been replaced. The note was in my grandmother's hand, written to my father. Sophia took care of the cost for the new fencing after the storm. She said the land should stay usable and not to make a fuss about it. I told her I would write it down so it was remembered. I read the note twice, then folded it again and slipped it into my pocket with the phone. No one at the table had seen it fall. No one had seen me take it. When I went inside, my older sister was at the kitchen counter with her phone in her hand. She looked up when I entered. I just sent my mother the list of pictures we agreed on. We can finalize the order tonight. I nodded once and continued past her toward the back room. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed again. The screen of my phone lit up with a new email notification. The sender was my older sister. The recipient line showed my mother's address, and below it my own. She had hit reply, all by mistake, on a message meant only for my mother. The text was short. Sophia is already correcting the stories in front of my aunt. We need to be more careful with what we say around her for the rest of the weekend. If she keeps pushing back, we can say she's tired from the drive and leave it at that. The album has to stay the way we planned. I read the message once, then I saved it with the recording and the earlier email. The note from my grandmother was still in my pocket. Outside the closed door, I could hear my older sister laughing at something my aunt had said. They were still following the plan they had made on the recording. They still believed the only person who might disrupt it was me and that I would eventually stop. I remained seated on the edge of the bed, the phone in one hand and the folded note in the other. The weekend was not over. They had made another mistake, and this time, the mistake had reached me in writing while they were still in the same house. By Sunday evening, they gathered again at the kitchen table to finalize the legacy album before everyone left the next morning. My aunt had the pages laid out in order. My cousin sat beside her, turning the photographs so the light caught the details. My father stood near the window. My mother and my older sister sat at the head of the table with the final layout sheet between them. My older sister looked up when I entered. We saved the last section for you to approve. It covers the improvements from the last few years. We kept the language general so no one feels singled out. I sat across from her. I read the draft you left on the counter. It says the fencing replacement after the storm was a family project led by you and my father. That is not accurate. My mother sighed. Sophia, we have been over this. The album is meant to show the property as a whole, not to assign credit for every repair. Your sister put a great deal of time into organizing the work. My older sister nodded. I coordinated the crew and made sure the materials arrived on time. You were here for the first day and then had to return to the city for work. We simply wrote what actually happened. I placed the printed emails on the table face down for the moment. I have the voice recording from Friday afternoon where the two of you discussed exactly how to describe the fencing so my name would not appear. I also have the email you sent yesterday that was meant only for my mother, but arrived in my inbox as well. In it, you told her to say I was tired and overreacting if I pushed back during the photos. The table went still. My aunt set down the photograph she had been holding. My cousin looked from me to my older sister and did not speak. My father turned from the window but stayed where he was. My older sister's expression did not change at first. Then the smile she had worn all weekend tightened at the edges. You recorded a private conversation. That is not something a person does if they care about family peace. I did not intend to record it, I said. The app kept running after our call ended. What it captured was the two of you deciding how to erase my contributions in front of the rest of the family. That is the conversation I care about. My mother reached for the printed emails and turned them over. She read the second one, then passed the page to my older sister without speaking. My older sister read it, then set it down. Accidents happen with email. It does not change what we are trying to do here. The album is for the family and for anyone who might want to know the history of the land. We are protecting the story that keeps everyone connected. I took the grandmother's note from my wallet and unfolded it on the table. The handwriting was faint but clear. I read it aloud once, then left it where they could all see it. Sophia took care of the cost for the new fencing after the storm. She said the land should stay usable and not to make a fuss about it. I told her I would write it down so it was remembered. My aunt leaned forward to look at the date and the signature. My cousin read it over her shoulder. My father's face changed the way it changed when he recognized something he had chosen to forget. My older sister looked at the note for a long moment. Grandma wrote a lot of things down. She did not always know the full picture of who paid for what or who arranged the work. Memory is not the same as fact. I folded the note again and returned it to my wallet. I have the receipts and the transfer records if anyone wants to see them. I also have the recording and the emails. I will not sign my name to a version of the story that removes me from it. If the album goes out with my image or my name attached, it will use the accurate record, or it will not use them at all. My mother spoke then, her voice lower than before. You are making this into something larger than it needs to be. We are trying to keep the family together. That has always required some compromise. I am not asking for compromise on the facts, I said. I am stating what will happen from now on. I will not attend these weekends again. I will not contribute money or time to the property without a clear record of what I provided and what it was used for. If anyone asks me about the legacy album or the history of the land, I will answer with the version I can prove. I will not stay silent to protect the version the two of you prefer. My older sister pushed her chair back and stood. You have always been the one who kept score, even when we were children. You cannot let anything go without making sure everyone knows exactly what you did. That is why these conversations always end this way. I remained seated. I stopped keeping score in my head years ago. I started keeping records instead. There is a difference. No one spoke for a moment. My aunt was the first to move. She gathered the pages of the album and stacked them neatly. Perhaps we should finish this another time, when everyone has had a chance to think. My cousin stood as well. He looked at me, then at my older sister. I remember the fencing work. You were the one who stayed when the rain came back in. I was there that night, too. He did not wait for an answer. He walked out onto the porch with my aunt. My father remained by the window. He did not look at my mother or my older sister. He only looked at me for a moment, then nodded once and followed the others outside. My mother and my older sister stayed at the table. My older sister picked up the printed emails and held them without reading them again. You have made your point. I hope you understand what you have done to the rest of the weekend and to any chance of the family moving forward together. I stood. I understand exactly what I have done. I have refused to let the record be written without me in it, that is all. I left the kitchen and returned to the back room. I packed my bag, set it by the door, and slept for a few hours. In the morning, I drove away before the others had finished breakfast. No one came to the porch to say goodbye. A week later, my cousin called. He told me the neighbor who had stopped by for the photographs had been asking people in town about the disagreement over the family property. The neighbor had repeated parts of what he had heard during the photo session and what my cousin had confirmed afterward. The story was moving through the small circle of people who had known the family for years. My older sister's name and my mother's name were attached to the version in which they had tried to control the narrative. The version in which I had simply stated the facts and then left was the one that seemed to be spreading. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I thanked him and ended the call. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt the absence of something I had carried for a long time without naming it. The belief that there was still a version of the family in which I could be present without having to guard every fact about my own life had ended. That safety, if it had ever been real, was gone. I returned to my work in St. Louis. The consulting jobs continued. I kept the same careful records I had always kept now, with an additional folder that contained only the evidence from that weekend. I did not share it unless someone asked directly. Most people did not. The land outside Sullivan remained in the family name. I did not visit it again. Months later, I received a single message from my older sister. It was short. She wrote that the Legacy album had been set aside for now and that she hoped I was well. I did not reply. There was nothing left to negotiate. I had spent years believing that silence was the price of staying connected to the people who raised me. The recording, the emails, and the note from my grandmother showed me that the connection I had been protecting was already broken. It had been broken by the steady rewriting of my own history. Choosing to stop protecting their version did not restore anything that had already been lost. It only stopped the loss from continuing on my side. I still drive past the turn that leads to the gravel road when I travel south. I do not take it. The property is no longer mine to maintain in secret or to defend in public. The record I carry is the one I can prove. That is enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If this sounds familiar, write relate in the comments. What would you have done when you first heard the recording?